They called it a routine hearing, just another day in court. But for 14-year-old Zara Williams, it was the day the world decided whether her father would ever walk free again. The marble floor echoed beneath her sneakers as she stepped inside the courtroom, clutching a stack of papers so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every eye watched her, not with kindness, but with that cold curiosity that follows when a black child dares to stand where she isn't supposed to be. The judge leaned back in his chair, smirking slightly. He was the kind of man who had spent years mistaking power for wisdom, and he looked at Zara like she was a joke trying to play lawyer. The lawyers whispered, the crowd snickered, and Zara felt every second of it pressing down on her like a storm, but she didn't flinch. Because beneath that quiet face was a plan that would turn this mockery into a lesson the judge would never forget. She had read every law book she could find, every case that sounded like her father's. What she was about to say would shake the courtroom to its foundation. Not because she was loud, but because she was right, and when she spoke, the entire room fell silent. What if a child's voice could expose a system built to ignore it? Would anyone listen? Or would they laugh until the truth burned through their smiles? The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that comes from respect, but the stunned quiet that follows disbelief. Zara stood there, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The papers in her hand shook slightly, but her voice didn't. Her father, Marcus Williams, sat behind the defense table. Wrists bound, face tired, eyes hollow from months of being called things no man should be called. He had been a bus driver all his life, one of those men who never missed a shift, who always greeted passengers with a nod and a "Mornin', ma'am." Yet here he was, accused of assaulting a passenger after trying to stop a fight on his route. The incident was simple. A white teenager had started it, Marcus had intervened, and somehow the story twisted until the man who kept peace was painted as the aggressor. The case was built on lies and everyone knew it, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Zara remembered the night the police came. Flashing lights on their small front lawn, neighbors peeking through curtains. She'd watched them take her father away, his hands raised, his eyes locked on hers as if to say, "Stay strong, baby." She hadn't cried then. She had waited. And waiting had turned into reading, hours spent at the local library. Flipping through thick law books she barely understood at first, underlining words she couldn't even pronounce. Now, those same words were her armor. The judge sighed, glancing at her over his glasses. "Miss Williams," he said, almost laughing, "this isn't a school debate. Sit down before you embarrass yourself." But Zara didn't sit. She walked to the front, voice low but steady. "Your Honor, the evidence you've been shown doesn't match the incident report filed that night." The courtroom stirred. Even Marcus raised his head. The judge blinked. "Excuse me?" Zara lifted one of her papers. "The timestamp on the security footage, it's been edited. There's a 2-minute gap between frames. I compared it to the Transit Authority's schedule and passenger logs. You can't see it because it's subtle, but it's there." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't a tantrum. This was precision. Zara had found the truth buried in the small print of a legal document no one cared to read. It wasn't luck, it was obsession. Every evening after school, she sat at the kitchen table, tracing her father's name through case files like she was mapping a crime scene. What she discovered wasn't just a mistake, it was manipulation. Someone had cut those 2 minutes out to erase the moment a white teen swung first, and yet she was the one being mocked. The judge leaned forward, his smile fading. "You're telling me you, a child, reviewed court evidence?" "Yes, sir," she said, "and I found what no one wanted to see." He wanted to dismiss her. She could see it in his eyes. But something about her tone, the quiet certainty, made him hesitate. For the first time, he looked unsure. The defense attorney, who had barely spoken all morning, finally rose. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "the young lady is correct. The footage she's referring to was provided by the prosecution, but I never noticed that cut." Zara looked at her father. His eyes were wet now. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." In that moment, the weight of every insult, every snicker, every mocking headline, it all started to shift. Not disappear, but move. The air in the courtroom changed. Zara wasn't fighting for her father anymore. She was fighting to make the truth undeniable. Outside those walls, the world still ran on assumptions, on skin color, on background, on who looked guilty. But inside, at that second, one young black girl had forced a judge to see. The moment was fragile. Anything could still collapse, but she had planted the seed. And once the truth took root, it would grow where no bias could reach, because this wasn't just about her father's freedom anymore. It was about proving that justice only breathes when someone dares to speak for it. The judge leaned back, the creak of his chair echoing across the courtroom. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. His smirk was gone, replaced by something Zara couldn't quite read, a mix of irritation and curiosity. She had interrupted the comfortable rhythm of a system that wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by a young black girl standing alone with a folder in her hands. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we shouldn't entertain baseless claims from—" But the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Show me the footage again," he said sharply. Gasps rippled through the room. The clerk moved quickly, pulling up the video on the large monitor. The courtroom dimmed slightly as the playback began. Marcus stepping between two shouting passengers. The chaos, the swing, the cut to static. Then the supposed assault. Zara's finger pointed at the screen. "Right there," she whispered. "The frame jump," the judge squinted. The room held its breath, and then he saw it, a flicker so small you could miss it if you blinked. The missing 2 minutes that changed everything. A murmur broke through the crowd. Journalists scribbled notes. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. The judge's silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel the weight of what had just happened. Zara didn't smile. She didn't move. She had been preparing for disbelief, not victory, but that small, undeniable glitch had cracked something far bigger than a case, because in that courtroom, bias had always been invisible, until she made it visible. 2 days later, the story hit the local news. Teen challenges judge over missing evidence. It spread faster than anyone expected. Social media caught fire. Clips of the hearing leaked. Some called her brave. Others called her a liar. Reporters camped outside their small house, shouting questions at a teenage girl who just wanted her dad back. Marcus, released on temporary bail, sat with her on the porch one evening as the sunset poured orange light across the cracked concrete. His hands trembled as he reached for hers. "You did more in that room than I ever could," he said quietly. But Zara shook her head. "They're not done yet, Dad. They're going to fight back." She was right. The next morning, the prosecutor's office filed a motion, claiming the video discrepancy was a technical glitch, not evidence tampering. They tried to bury it under jargon and paperwork. The news cycle shifted. Sympathy faded. People moved on, but Zara didn't. She spent nights printing documents, connecting lines with a red marker, drawing maps of names, dates, and digital files. The kitchen became a war room. The refrigerator was covered with sticky notes. The floor was littered with printouts. Every time her father told her to rest, she just shook her head and whispered, "They'll never stop unless someone makes them." That's when she found it, buried deep in the metadata of the footage. The original upload date, it didn't match the timestamp in court. It had been re-uploaded, edited, and then renamed before being handed over as authentic. She wasn't supposed to understand how to find that. But she did. And the next day, when she walked back into court, she wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't the nervous girl defending her father. She was the storm coming for the truth. "Your Honor," she began, placing the printed data on the table. The footage wasn't recorded once. It was altered 3 days after the incident. Here's the file history. You can see who accessed it and when. The courtroom went still again. The prosecutor froze, eyes darting to his assistant. "Who authorized this?" the judge demanded. The prosecutor stammered. We received it directly from Transit Security." But Zara interrupted, calm, deliberate. "That's not true. The signature belongs to the officer who arrested my dad. He uploaded it from his personal account. You can check the source log." The judge's gavel struck once. "Court will recess," he barked. The crowd erupted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Marcus turned to his daughter, voice cracking. "How did you even know where to look?" She smiled faintly. "Because when they said I couldn't understand the law, they forgot one thing. The truth doesn't need a degree. Just someone stubborn enough to chase it." Outside, rain began to fall. The courthouse steps glistened under gray skies as cameras flashed in every direction. Zara stood under her umbrella beside her father, her face calm while reporters shouted her name. "Do you think you can win this?" someone asked. Zara looked into the lens, her voice steady. "Winning isn't the point. It's proving that justice can't survive on silence." Behind her, the prosecutor's team rushed past, avoiding the cameras. Inside, investigators had already begun reviewing the evidence Zara had exposed. It wasn't just about one missing frame anymore. It was about a system that had learned how to hide its mistakes and protect its pride. Zara's story was forcing it to look in the mirror, and mirrors, when forced to reflect injustice, have a way of cracking. That night, she sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. Her father slept on the couch, finally peaceful. Zara's reflection stared back at her from the glass. Tired but unbroken, she didn't know what would happen next. If the truth would be enough. If the court would admit its failure, or if the same silence would swallow them again. But one thing was certain. She had given the system a choice, to fix itself or to fall under its own weight. Because when the law mocks the powerless, it forgets that power doesn't last forever, and sometimes the smallest voice can become the loudest echo in the halls of justice. Morning sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, painting soft gold lines across the walls. Zara woke to the sound of footsteps outside. The press was back, waiting for another headline. But this day was different. Today the court would either bury her evidence or let it burn through everything they'd built to keep people like her father quiet. She dressed in silence, her hands steady. Her father watched from the kitchen, coffee cup trembling slightly. "You don't have to go through this again," he said softly. "I do," she replied. "If I stop now, they win twice." When they arrived at the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. Protesters held signs that read, "Truth has no age and justice for Marcus." Across the street, others muttered that it was all an overreaction. The world had chosen sides, but for Zara, there was only one truth left to defend. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with tension. The judge entered, face unreadable. "Miss Williams," he began, "you've made serious allegations. Today we'll hear from transit security and the arresting officer to confirm your claims." Zara's heart hammered. The officer, James Reddick, stepped up to the witness stand. Broad-shouldered, white, eyes full of arrogance, the kind of man who believed a badge was a crown. He had arrested Marcus that night, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. The prosecutor nodded to him. "Officer Reddick, did you tamper with the evidence presented to this court?" "No, sir," he said confidently. "The footage was unaltered when I submitted it." Zara rose from her seat. Her voice was calm, but her words cut clean. "Then why does the file's metadata show your username accessing it 3 days later? And why is the same file renamed version 2 finaledit.mp4? A ripple spread through the courtroom. The officer blinked, thrown off. That must be a system error," he stammered. Zara stepped closer. "You logged in from your home IP address. You changed the timestamp. You erased the part where the passenger hit my father first. Do you want me to read the access log out loud?" The judge's gavel struck. "Order!" Reddick's jaw tightened. He looked to the prosecutor, who avoided his gaze. The defense attorney turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we request the original file from Transit Security servers to be subpoenaed for verification." "Granted," the judge said. The officer shifted, sweat beading on his forehead. "You can't," the judge's voice boomed. "Officer, I suggest you remain silent, for the first time." The courtroom's weight fell not on Zara, but on the man who had tried to silence her. Hours later, the original footage arrived, uncut and raw. The missing 2 minutes played in full, the white teenager throwing the first punch, Marcus stepping between them, trying to stop the chaos, only to be grabbed by the officer and slammed to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Zara didn't look triumphant. She just exhaled slowly, her father's hand gripping hers. The judge leaned forward, voice low but clear. This court finds sufficient evidence of misconduct in the presentation of this case. Charges against Marcus Williams are hereby dismissed. Gasps erupted. The crowd stood. Cameras flashed. Marcus closed his eyes, whispering a prayer he'd been holding for months. The judge turned to Zara. Miss Williams, I owe you an apology. And this court owes you gratitude, she nodded quietly. You owe my dad his life back, she said simply. The judge looked down, unable to meet her eyes. When they stepped outside, the world erupted into applause. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones waving, lights flashing. Zara shielded her face, but her voice carried over the noise. My dad didn't need a miracle, she said. He needed fairness. And if a 14-year-old can find the truth with a library card, what's stopping everyone else from doing the same? Her words hit like thunder. The crowd fell silent, then roared. Within hours, the video of her statement spread across the internet. Zara Williams trended in every major city. People shared her speech, teachers replayed it in classrooms, and parents told their children about the girl who made the law listen. But while the world celebrated, Zara knew something deeper had shifted. The officer who framed her father was being investigated. The prosecutor's office faced questions about selective evidence handling, and the judge who once mocked her now spoke her name with respect. She had rewritten the story, not just for her family, but for every voice that had ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. That night, she and her father sat on the porch again. The air was calm, the stars bright. Marcus looked at her, his voice filled with awe. How did you stay so sure, baby? Even when everyone laughed? Zara smiled faintly. Because truth doesn't care who believes it first. It only needs one person who won't give up. The world would remember her as a symbol of courage. But for Zara, it wasn't about being a symbol. It was about being heard. Because silence, she realized, is the enemy of justice. And she had learned how to break it. The night after the verdict, the neighborhood felt different. The same streets that once whispered pity now carried pride. People Zara barely knew stopped by their porch with flowers, letters, and quiet smiles that said, "You reminded us what fighting back looks like." For the first time in months, her home wasn't filled with fear. It was filled with breathing. Marcus sat on the steps, sipping coffee that finally tasted warm again. Every few minutes he glanced at his daughter, still half in disbelief that this small, stubborn girl had done what entire law firms wouldn't. You changed the story, Z, he said softly. Not just mine. A lot of others, too. She looked at him and smiled. Then let's make sure it doesn't end here. 2 weeks later, Zara was standing behind a podium at her school auditorium. The banner above her read, Youth Civic Forum, Voices for Justice. She wasn't used to microphones or cameras, but her voice carried through the hall like it belonged there. They told me I was too young to understand the law, she said. But what they really meant was that they didn't expect someone like me to read it. I learned every rule they used against my father, and then I used those same rules to show the truth. Students clapped. Teachers wiped tears. And in the front row, her father watched with a quiet pride that words couldn't hold. That day, local news called her the girl who redefined courage. National shows invited her to speak. Civil rights organizations reached out, wanting her story shared. But Zara never chased fame. She chased fairness. When asked how she found the courage to face a courtroom full of mockery, her answer never changed. I didn't fight because I was fearless. I fought because fear doesn't get the final word. Months passed, but the echoes of her case didn't fade. Officer Reddick was suspended, pending a criminal investigation for evidence tampering. The prosecutor resigned quietly. And that same judge, once smirking, dismissive, untouchable, pushed for new review protocols in his court. Change was slow, imperfect, and uneven. But it had begun. Zara was invited to visit the local courthouse again, this time as a guest of honor. When she stepped through the same tall doors, the guards nodded respectfully. The same marble floor that once made her feel small now sounded like victory beneath her steps. She stood in front of the judge's bench, running her fingers across the smooth wood. The judge entered, older now, eyes softer. "Miss Williams," he said quietly, "you reminded this court what justice is supposed to mean." "I hope you never stop doing that." Zara nodded. "Justice doesn't stop when one person walks free," she replied. "It stops when people stop looking for the truth." He smiled faintly. "You planning to be a lawyer?" She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll just make sure lawyers remember why they started." Later that evening, Zara returned home to a mailbox overflowing with letters from people across the country. Some were handwritten, shaky with emotion. "You gave me hope to reopen my brother's case." Others came from children her age. "I want to learn the law, too." She spread them across the table, eyes wide. "Dad, look at this," he chuckled softly. "Guess the world finally realized what I've known since you were little. You don't just ask questions. You uncover them." Months later, a new law was proposed in their state, the Williams Reform Act, calling for transparency in evidence handling and the protection of citizens' rights during public service investigations. It wasn't perfect, but it carried her name. Not because she sought recognition, but because she forced accountability to have a face. At the signing ceremony, Zara stood beside her father, reporters snapping photos. She didn't speak this time. She didn't need to. The look on her face, calm, resolute, proud, said it all. The same girl who had once been laughed at for speaking in a courtroom now stood as the reason that same courtroom had to change. That night, back on the porch where it all began, Marcus looked up at the stars. "You know," he said, "every system has cracks. You just found the light hiding in one of them." Zara smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Dad, I didn't find the light. I became it." They sat there for a long time, saying nothing, letting the silence feel clean again, no longer heavy with injustice, but filled with possibility. Because justice, she'd learned, isn't a word carved in stone. It's something you fight for, protect, and rebuild every time it breaks. And sometimes it takes a child to remind the world that truth isn't fragile. It's fearless.